This you are looking at now is the roundest object in the world.
And I can start interacting with the object. Is a simulation of how this object moving the object further away. The object less how far away it is. Basically, there's the camera, the lens that the vibration, how much light is shining on the object, how the way that all this like time interact with each row, but also about the object they react. So here's an object.
So what part of speech is the word cake?
Like the object images. Okay, authentic object. X, Y, and Z axis, but there are other dimensions, like time and area.
I'm about to touch a 1 kilogram sphere of silicon 28 atoms.
You can create
not only these objects, we can also plot things like strings, we can create oranges, A4s, almonds, integers, and these are objects. And every object has its own identity and its themselves are objects. Data, right? Food is an object, string is an object, right?
The fast Make sure the object you are trying to track has the right amount of contrast. The tracking software is separated from other things. It uses the contrast. This watch is going to be tracked easily because it has a very smooth movement.
3, 2, 1, go. Mary had a little lamb. Little lamb, little lamb.
I want to answer one question for you. What is an object in Ruby exactly?
The object of a sentence is the person or thing that receives the action of the verb. It is the who or what that the subject does something to. That sounds complicated, but we'll understand it more after we practice. Terry carried out the trash. In this sentence, Terry is the subject. It is the one performing the action and the one the sentence is about. Carried is the verb. It is the action being performed by the subject. Trash is the object. It is what is being carried, and it is what the subject is doing something to.
Hello and welcome to this lecture video performance. Objects is or are the object of this lecture today or this evening. First, I have to choose which version of objects we are talking about. I wish to talk to you about object-oriented ontology. What is object-oriented ontology? Well, it is a theory put by speculative realists that everything that exists is an object. Ontology is simply the study of metaphysics dealing with being or existence. It's quite complicated, so for me to explain it, here is a recording of me explaining the theory to my dad while we watch Columbo.
It's this thing. It's the theory that all objects, everything is an object. So you are an object.
Yeah.
Your jumper is an object.
Okay.
Your living room is an object.
Okay.
Your thoughts are an object.
Right.
Or each thought is an object in
So
itself.
it doesn't have to be a physical
It doesn't have to be a physical thing. So Sherlock Holmes is an object. Even though Benedict Cumberbatch is also another object, he's not Sherlock Holmes. That's a separate object.
Right.
The concept of Sherlock Holmes.
Right, so a concept is an object, and
Yeah.
a thought or a map.
Nation is an object. Tesco is an object itself. Not just like the branch in Newton Arts, like all of Tesco is an object.
Right.
Etc. Etc.
Okay, so everything that possibly exists, either imaginary or real, is an object.
Is an object, correct.
Okay.
So, and the reason they're saying this is so that there's less human agency over everything. So everything exists. So in previous philosophy, everything exists and humans exist. So it's humans and everything else. This is the thing. Everything exists and humans are another object as part of that.
Okay.
And it's also about human knowledge not really working properly. So for instance, defining objects is pretty difficult. So pick an object in this room.
Pick an object.
Pick any object in this room. A nice, easy physical one would be good. One you can define what it is.
Okay. The wooden dragon sculpture thing.
My dad found it quite hard to answer what a dragon sculpture was, so I've left that part out of this recording, and I will. It was a bit of a train wreck. So let's have a replacement conversation with somebody else. So as my conversation with Cleverbot showed, it's hard to say what an object is. If I want to describe this glass bottle, I could say it's made out of glass. Or I could say what it does. I can say that it holds liquids. But the object is more than these things. The object also isn't these things. Isn't just these things. The object is an in-between of these. And that's what we're trying to get at with object-oriented ontology. Let's go back to the recording.
This is what we're looking at with any object. Is that all objects exist in two ways to humans, which is what it's made out of and what it does, not what it is.
Okay.
So this sort of ontology is sort of trying to say that objects exist,
yes,
and exist outside of human perception.
Yes.
And we only sense things off them, and it's not, and there's everything exists in its own right.
Yeah.
So you know that you exist in your own right because you have a conscience, and that's you.
Yeah.
You can never access the conscience of anything else or the perspective of anything else. We're not saying that the dragon sculpture has a conscience, but we are saying that the dragon sculpture has an eye, or it has an existence to it, because it is an object which we can never directly access.
Right.
This is it. That's.
And you have to organise some sort of music or.
So I'm making a performance music lecture, explaining all this, but also trying to equate it to music and sound, which is very difficult because it's hard to say that sound is an object.
So let's leave that conversation there for the moment. I will discuss sound as an object later in this lecture, but for now, let's look at what this object-oriented ontology, or OOO as it's also known as, a little further. Let's look at it a little further, particularly its implications and further definitions. Every object that exists in two ways. Every object is a real object or a sensual object, and they have real qualities or sensual qualities. An object's definition in this sense is coined by Graham Harman, who's a leading figure in OOO, and he defines it as anything that is irreducible in two directions. An object is not real unless it is irreducible to its constituent parts, and an object is not real unless it's irreducible to its effects. A real object is an object that exists in the real world. A sensual object is the version of that object that we can sense, or by touching or by seeing it. A sensual object is an object that relates only to its relations to other objects. The real object always exists. And the object has two types of qualities, real and sensual, with the same definitions of the real and sensual qualities. Now, objects have a very tense relationship between their qualities and with other objects. Now, there's a very easy way to realize this hard concept with an even harder object to define, the object of time. Here we have a glockenspiel key being hit, which we hear for about 9 to 10 seconds. Here is the note as it would be perceived in time by a dog object. For my mathematics here, I have equated the original sound as being heard by a human that is 100 years old, and the dog would be 15 years old, so that we hear the note about 15% slower. Next, a fly. Here is the note that as it would be perceived in time by a fly object. A fly exists for about a day or 24 hours. Now here is the note as it would be perceived in time by the object Earth, or the planet Earth. Now we're not saying that Earth has a consciousness in which it perceives these things, but it does have a perspective. And if it were to try and access time, or try and relate to time, this is how this sound would sound to Earth. It is so short though that I have played it 24 times. The note itself has not changed each time, but each object has its own senses to perceive time of which itself is an object. Let's look at some further ways of looking at object relations. I will now present to you a video object in which my past self, who is also an object, will discuss a local object that is a park and how the objects within the park have relations that are objects between other objects. And myself has combined with another object to create a new object for you to perceive.
We are in an object. This object is known as a park. What makes this park an object? Well, as we previously looked at, it would be silly to look at how things are made to make things objects, because that's not what an object is. However, that's what we're going to do, because that's what our knowledge is limited by. So this park is made out of fields, a train track, some orchards, and some trees. But all of these things are also made out of their own objects. Again, reinforcing this idea more than what they're made out of. This object is also facilitated by other objects, humans. And humans have a rather good habit of being quite good, maybe, or maybe quite bad at facilitating objects. So they've planted some trees here, moved some rocks around, built some buildings, put some rules in place that allow other objects to flourish when other objects would not. And that's the role of objects as facilitators. But they are still also objects, having their own relationships and things. The relationship to the other objects in the park, making a new object within the facilities. All the information that you're currently receiving and digesting yourself. There is also an object. Playing ball and catch, throwing other objects. It's very complicated. It's very in the park. Is a relationship disruptive the objects are objects that disrupt the park of other objects. However, there can also be disruptive. So an object in this, like myself, as a chicken in the middle of the park, which is also in the middle of the field, talking to my iPhone. Another disruptive object would be a tornado of throwing all the objects behind. With the park, it's still the same. How would the park be destroyed? It's hard to say. You could build a whole bunch of buildings on top of this, but if there's some green grass left, you could say that's still the park. Would you? Is the park made up of just the grass, or is it the space in which it's around? Who knows?
So let's pull apart that video a little bit. The video is disrupted several times. What we mean by disrupted is there is objects that get in the way of other objects trying to exist, but the objects are still existing. It's just how we're perceiving them. Objects are also currently more than what they are. We, in this video, looked at objects from a very human-centric perspective, and that isn't very useful for looking at the wider scheme of things, or for ecology. Objects are always more than what they currently are. We could say that a sofa is comfortable and red, but we could change the outside of it to blue, and we could throw it out a window, and it could kill someone because it's heavy as well. In this video, we also fail to really say anything, and that's because knowledge doesn't really always work. Any form of knowledge becomes one of these two things that define an object, that we never really properly get at. What it does, things are not limited by what they do, or what it's made out of, statistics, etc. What we're also trying to say here with this video is that this video is an art object. It creates things that are not necessarily equatable to both statistics and what they are doing. Because we know that art has cognitive value without precise forms of knowledge. This brings us to sound, which brings us back to my dad and Columbo.
Does sound exist in the physical self?
What's the thing? Does it enact a presence? People would say it doesn't really, but it's used in noise warfare rather than in police riots, rather than using bullets. You might fire sound cannons, which big massive sound that makes people go away because it really hurts them. Not as much as bullets. So that's an object. That's a physical object in that sense. And then when it comes to music, it's built up of little tiny other objects. Then the music itself is a complete other object when you attach an artist to it. Because then you're thinking about, this isn't just the music, this is what that object, the person has made, and you're getting that from it.
Sound hits your eardrum, make the physical.
So yeah, is the object your ear wobbling, or is it the thing that produces it, or the bit in between? This is the point. This is where it's blowing my mind a little bit.
Yeah, it's hard to know.
So yeah.
As you can see, my father wasn't really too interested in continuing that conversation with sound and sound objects because it is quite complicated. However, I am quite a big fan of my point that music objects sort of become new objects when they're attached to another human object.
Here we have a sofa object in the park. What's a sofa doing in the park? Is this a disruptive object, or is it maybe an art object? Having the sofa in the park creates maybe an aesthetic experience. However, we both say what the objects are and the combination of how those objects actually exist in the world. The aesthetic object that happens in you does not actually maybe exist. Perhaps. There's a sofa in a park. Here it is.
Since making this recording, I definitely decided that sound is an object. But we'll get more onto that in a second. The ways we have attempted to understand objects answers for us the tricky, but also very dumb question of if a tree falls in a forest, does it make a sound? Well, the answer is yes. Sound exists outside human perception. Sound did not come into existence when humans came into existence. Although we can only assume this, of course, because we can't physically know what it was like before we existed. In fact, sound has been playing throughout this lecture that you cannot actually hear, intentionally and non-intentionally, facilitated by me, who's also an object. We must now bring to the attention the word object and sound. Instruments are objects. Are sounds qualities of an instrument object? Or objects within themselves? Well, let's put it this way. A sound object does not exhaust the instrument object. However, the sound object could be affected, warped, changed, or projected in different ways by the instrument object. But this also implies that the human object, playing the instrument object to create a sound object, is a facilitator of the sound objects. The sound objects do enact relations with other objects that perceive them. For instance, this sound object. It's quite unpleasant to the human brain object, which has received the sound object through the vast network of objects in the ear object. However, sound objects can be combined to make more complex sound objects. Let's talk about that for a second. This is a sound object. This is another sound object. At which point these sound objects become music. To us, a music object. Is it when I combine them with other notes? At which point does it still become music? Does it become music if I swap it to another instrument? It's not very different. What if I add harmony or another sound object? Etc., etc. There's still only a very small number of sound objects here. Arguably, if you look at things a Hawkian perspective, you could see the actual waves of the sounds and say each one is a particular object. But let's not do that, because that really hurts my brain. Think how many small objects are involved in these complex objects. In orchestral works, there are hundreds and thousands of sound objects in a short space of time. Imagine how many sound objects there are produced by a city in a matter of minutes. It's quite an unfathomable number. Why is this complex sound object not considered music? Because it's not composed or facilitated by a singular human object or other object? Please continue to think about these complex sound objects. Some call these complex sound objects music, which by our definitions of objects is an object itself. Music, it must be pointed out, is an oddity. In reality, in relation to all of this object jargon, no other organism that we have found listens to sound objects for pleasure, like we do, or craft sound objects into this complex music objects. As we are the only objects to perceive music objects, we must maybe claim that it does not exist to other objects, as those objects will only perceive music objects as complex and probably very strange sound objects. It must be pointed out, though, that some objects, namely animal objects, do use complex sound objects to communicate with one another. Triple O states that objects have essence. Road tar, if you eat it, will make you sick or kill you. This quality of tar just doesn't happen because you ingest it. It exists as part of the object of tar. Every object has an essence of sound. This is such a special thing to understand about objects. They all have the potential to make sound. However, objects cannot within themselves create a sound object. They must interact with another object to do so. Humans can only sing when contracting vocal cords. The heartbeat makes a sound from the combination of electrical impulses interacting with tissues and muscles that interact with the blood. Any object should make a sound when dropped on a cold, hard floor. I find that pretty beautiful. I find it quite hard to dispute this idea of essence. Sound is so inherent to objects that I do not think it impossible for music to exist outside of human perception. Does this mean the same for the other arts? Probably. Here is a video of me exploring objects and the related sounds. Observe the world. Enact the essences of objects that inspire, stimulate, educate, entertain you and the others around you.